Hi, Sil. Thanks for doing this and great to see you again. Could you just give us all an introduction on yourself before we kick into the topic?
Hi, Carl. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll very much like to do it. So I'm Sil. I work for a global consulting firm in one of their offices in Manchester. I have been in consulting pretty much all my life. That's close to 2 decades, even though probably I'm showing my age here now. But then I support the data architecture and the data engineering function for the data analyst team there. And the topic that we're going to discuss today, data products, is very close to my heart because day in, day out, we do speak to a lot of clients. Some are confused, some really don't know what to do, some have done something, hasn't worked out. So there's a lot of mixed feelings from different people I get. So that's something it will. I hope the next 30 minutes would be a really interesting conversation between you and Mikhail.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I'm particularly excited for this one because although I've kind of been working with data products, I wouldn't necessarily say it's kind of my wheelhouse, so to speak. So I'm really excited to get your opinions on this. So I'm going to try my best to ask questions and let you do the talking. I can't promise I won't jump in, but I'll do my best.
Absolutely, no worries.
Yeah. So if you can set the scene for us, so that'd be great, and talk us through what a data product is, and then probably why it's necessary to define what a data product is as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure, Carl. So I think what I'll do is I'll probably start off with an experience of mine. A few years back, I was working for a client. We had sort of a problem where people used to create ad hoc reports on their own, but then even though I say ad hoc, they used to do it every month. So month on month, people would spend like two days per month to create a report, and it was similar, but they used to do manual effort. So because we as consultants, we are working in the project, we sort of went ahead and created a bespoke report, which people can then use, which cut down the time from say 2 days to a few minutes, which was a great thing for that part of the organization. Now, 6 months down the line, when we sort of spoke with some other parts of the same organization, they said, "Oh, we do the same thing. Like, why didn't you tell us then?" And that when it like strike off, like, even though it's a big organization, not everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And it could be like, I'm doing something, Carl, you might need it, but if you don't know what I'm doing, you don't know what you're missing out on. And that's where is the light bulb moment of what is a data product. So almost to say, I won't go by the textbook definition, what Forbes and Gartner say, but almost you create a repeatable solution which people can discover, which people can trust, which people can access, and it should bring some value to them. So those are sort of the keywords. So if you first thing is obviously you need to know that it exists. So that's the discoverability part. So I've created a report, Carl, you know that I've created a report which is useful to you. Second point is that valuable. Is it bringing any value to you? Is it solving a problem that you have? If it's yes, then yeah, that ticks the second point. Is it secure? The data that I'm going to prepare or send to you, is it coming through an established channel where there are no data leaks, things like that? Because we are all sort of scared with PII and different sort of data leaks. Is it secure? That ticks the third box. And then is it accessible? If you were to now that you know that it exists and is valuable to you, can you access it? If you cannot access it, then again, even though you know it exists, it doesn't bring any value to you. So it has to be accessible to you. That's almost the fourth block.
Yeah.
And the last but not the least is the trustworthiness. So we all talk of data veracity scores. Like I create a nice report, but if it's garbage in, garbage out, yeah, you can access it, but it's not going to give you value. So that's the trustworthiness. So I would say these 5 points make sort of, I mean, almost define the data product. So you should be able to discover it. You should be able to have some value out of it. It should come through a secure channel. You should be able to trust the data, and you should be able to access it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I don't think I've ever heard it defined in that way before. I found that really interesting. Thanks for that, Sil. I've certainly learned something in the first few minutes already. And I suppose with something like that as well is that everything you've outlined there, I completely agree with. I think it's also then important that you know who then is consuming that data product, because it then, in terms of like the value, as you say, that all ties into the value. But then also, if like you can build the best data products in your company, that best products in the world in theory, but if no one's actually using it and nobody's aware of it, and to be honest, people could also be aware of it, but they're still not using it because they've got
Yeah.
the kind of the tried and tested ways of doing things. So I think, yeah, making sure that when you are doing all this documentation around what it is, you're also documenting who is actually using it as well. I think that's a really important thing to keep track of, and I think something that will be more important as data and data products become even more popular in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. I mean, you probably hit the nail on the head, saying that like whenever you create something, big data products or even anything else in like anywhere in life, like you need to know the why. Like if you're
Yes.
going to create a data product
Yeah.
for this instance, you need to know who's going to produce it, but then more important,
Yeah.
what is the problem that I'm going to solve?
Yeah.
If I'm just going to create, say, a ML, a model, a machine learning model, which is not going to solve anyone's problem, is it useful? Yeah, probably for me
Yeah.
because I'm going to test my skills, but not for
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
else
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I think as well, like you touched on something which, around the change management side of things as well. I think that's something that we don't always consider. Like, there's, as you say, you might build a data product, which in theory, turns 15 bespoke reports and ad hoc reports that have been run into one data product that people can consume. But if they've always done it that way, and you're not telling people, or you're not, I say telling people, but you're not bringing people along that journey as to why this is the better way to do things going forward and why it will be better for you in the long run, sort of what's in it for them. I think it's easier to build these data products that just don't then get used. So I think that's a really important piece to consider as well.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, in our consulting IT world, we talk of people, process, and tech. So the tech can come, the process we can establish, but then people, if no one is going to follow the process, then it's not going to be useful. So it's always it's always not even like, I wouldn't say advisable, but must to bring them early on, saying that this is the problem you have, this is what I'm going to build, and this is how it's going to solve you. So going back to the example I said, like they were doing something which they would take 2 weeks, it can do it a few minutes. So you're going to save two weeks of your time. You can do something more valuable in that time.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, brilliant. The next question I had, I think you've pretty much already answered it, to be honest. And it was basically just, explain with an example how to define a data product and how it can be useful. But I think you've definitely covered that in the answer, to be honest. Is there anything else you want to add to that, do you think?
I would probably add on a bit because like whenever we talk of data products, like it could be like a report, it could be a machine learning model, it could be an API, it could be anything. Like there's no fixed sort of definition to say like this defines or this categorizes to be a data product. But then if you think of the life cycle, like even from a common sense, you have to always start with a why. What's the problem you're solving? And once you know the why, then you come off like, okay, now that I know the problem, what's the next step? Like, do I say, if I'm going to build a report, what are the fields in the report? What's the contract going to look like? That's like step 2. Then you sort of then go and build it, and then you sort of go and release it into the big wide world and people can use it. Having said so, like it's always good to sort of do regular checks on the product. Like you have built a report which worked well 6 months back, but then the business has moved on. So is that report still giving so much value as it used to give 6 months back? Then you sort of refine and measure how the thing is. And then it might happen like what you built 2 years back is not valuable anymore. So would you still keep it? You probably not. You would retire it. So almost like think of like, I mean, in terms of the data lineage from cradle to grave, I mean, data products follow a similar life cycle.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Because I think it's very easy to, particularly if there's a lot of effort went into building a particular data product, that if another product comes along that's, more useful, for instance, and covers what, then it makes sense to, move the resources perhaps that are still working on that than to move them onto the newer. I think something that people might struggle with is that they might feel that they've been working on data products and it was useful, but then, like you say, the business or times data moves on essentially. They might feel a little bit like the product failed because it's now being retired, but it's not necessarily that. Like you say, it's just ran through its natural course, its natural life cycle. And I think that's a really, really, really interesting one to think about. Because I know personally, if I built a data product, I'd be a little bit concerned that it's being retired and think I've not done a good job. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. So yeah, that's brilliant. So yeah, so one thing with data products is that I think there's definitely some links to some things that have been done in the past in terms of like domain-driven design and things like that. So are data products something new, or is it? Would you say it's almost just like an evolution of domain-driven design?
I would say it's an evolution of what has been done in the past. So maybe like 20 years back, your domain-driven design was like a concept. And if you think of like why did even that come to life? Like when you are in a big project, you have got like 50 developers developing things in parallel. You want it to be consistent because you don't want like me to develop in one way, you develop another way, and then we can't merge the code. So to
Yeah,
bring that sense of consistency, to bring sense of even repeatability, if I can say, like, okay, I've done a piece of code which you might need 6 months down the line. So can you reuse it? Yes, you can if you have a consistent patterns frameworks defined. And to do all that, that's why like the domain-driven design sort of came up. You sort
yep,
of define the domains, then you sort of do the data modeling, the normal, the conceptual, logical, physical modeling. Then you go on what's the use case? Am I building a data mart? Am I building a warehouse? Am I building a data viz report? And then you do all that and you then sort of divvy the whole work up into small chunks. Now, come like if you now move forward to 20 years down the line, now what we have data products is something similar. What we are saying is like if I have to develop a data product, be it a report, be it a model, be it an API, I can link it up to the big enterprise model, which
yeah,
means that down the line, if someone else needs something, there is almost like a lineage to say, okay, if that's my say, I'll again probably go back to one of the examples that when I used to work for a healthcare client, they had the concept of a patient and a care subject. Now they both meant the same thing. So when you are in a hospital, you are probably a care subject. When you are at your home but still being treated by a GP, you're a patient. But then you would both have similar attributes. And if you think of the very high level domain, is probably called a patient. So if you had a report built on patient, could you reuse it for a care subject? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with a few changes here and there, but then 95% of the job is already done. And that's where like the
yeah,
concepts, principles of domain-driven design still hold good for data products.
yeah. That's really really interesting because I think it's very easy to, and this I think is something that people should be aware of, that you could very much build a data product just in a silo, and that's
Mhm.
not what you want to do. Exactly as you say there, you need to apply it to the wider sort of your wider enterprise strategy,
Yeah.
and your wider data strategy. And exactly as you say, like your different domains and things like that, it's like you
Mhm.
don't want to be defining something differently in a data product, because that is really dangerous. Then if you start
Mhm.
having data products that are all essentially doing, giving conflicting information, and you end
Mhm.
up in theory where perhaps we were 20 years ago, where
Mhm.
you've got silos of reports and things like that. It's a similar type of thing. It's just on a on a bigger scale. There, it's a
Yeah.
product rather than just a report. So yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I completely agree with all that. So, what is data as a product, and how is this different from a data product?
That's a good question, Carl. And like we architects like to confuse people at times, not always.
Yeah, yeah,
So we have
yeah,
got a concept of data product. We have tried to stretch that and extend it to another thing which we call data as a product. So if you think going back to the story of when I was doing a report, I have done something. And when I say done something, it's got a code. So there is some sort of logic that stands behind the report. I have got the data set, which will link back to the metadata, which tables, which fields, things like that. And I've got an infrastructure. Say I'm building this in Power BI. So
Mhm.
I will either have it on a server or on a client. So that's the infra. Now, when I say data product, that's sort of the enabler of data as a product. So when you're going to deliver it, you not only deliver the code, not only
Yeah,
you deliver the data and the metadata, but you also deliver the infra. So if you say
yeah,
didn't have access to Power BI, like can I sort of deliver that data product as a service to you?
right,
So
yeah,
think
yeah,
of
yeah.
like data product as an enabler to
Mhm.
the goal that is data as a product.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting thinking about it that way. Yeah, because I think it's very easy to confuse the two, isn't it? But like you say, you've got your data products, and then it's how you serve that as a product to people essentially. Um, Yeah, and I know we won't go down this rabbit hole, but like this is where the data mesh and things like that start to go into that in a lot more detail. But yeah, we'd be here all day. I think if we talked about data mesh as
Oh
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's probably our discussion beyond this discussion, Carl. So, I mean, what I would like to add is like, I mean, when you think of data as a product, you think that what you do to provide data as a service,
Yeah,
almost like a SaaS solution which you
yeah,
provide to
yeah,
clients. And now because
yeah,
everyone
yeah,
is moving to cloud, you don't want to do any installation on your laptop or your computer. You provide as a service. So that as a service is as a product, whereas data
yeah.
product is pretty much the softer side of things.
Yeah, so like in theory, like a really simple and oversimplified example, like a data product could be a Power BI dashboard, but data as a product could in theory be the data that feeds that, but in a way that you can connect, via APIs or things like
Yeah,
that, people can connect to that data. Yeah, I think that's probably an easy way of looking at it for a
yeah,
lot of people.
absolutely.
So can you explain it with an example? I mean, I suppose we kind of just did that, but I think you'll have a better example than me. Can you explain with an example of how to define data as a product and how this can be useful?
I can. So what I'll do is I'll probably pick an example which most of us use in our daily lives, which is when you log on to your Gmail account, and if you see the 9 dots at the top right, and you click on it, you can see your Google, your Google account, your Gmail, your YouTube, Google Meets, everything comes up from that 9 boxes. So what you are essentially being served is data as a product. So all those
Yeah,
items in that box corresponds to one product, and they're all served as a service to you, whether you refer to a Gmail, whether you open and want to watch a video on YouTube, whether you want to chat with your friends or colleagues or clients over Google Meets, you are catering to a different business problem. And based on the
yeah,
business problem, you are being served a different product. Like, even though we might not think it to be a data product or data as a product, but that's what
yeah.
it exactly is.
That's a brilliant example. I would never have thought of it in that way, but as soon as you put it out, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a really good, yeah, really good example. Really good example. I think that'll land with a lot of people and not just people that work in data,
Yeah,
because
absolutely. I mean,
yeah, yeah, that's
that's
really good.
something we unconsciously use, everybody, more or
Yeah,
less,
yeah. We're essentially using data as a product.
for a
Whenever we
long
pick
time.
up, yeah, whenever we pick up our smartphones now, we're using data. We're interacting with data as a
Yeah.
product in some way, shape, or form. Um, yeah, brilliant example. I like that one. I'm going to steal that one still. If
No worries.
if somebody asks me about that, I'm going to use that as an example. Um, so yeah, in terms of you've obviously got a vast amount of experience. What experience, could you talk about some experiences you've had with implementing data products and data as a product? Things like the approaches you've taken, challenges, pitfalls, and sort of best practices.
Yeah, sure, Carl. I mean, to be honest, like one of the points that we have already discussed in the last 10, 15 minutes is the ownership from the business. It's like bringing them on into the journey pretty
Mm,
early on. And when I say early on, I would say from day zero itself. Like when
yeah,
you start defining the business problem, you would bring them on to say, okay, you are doing this in 2 weeks. It can be done in a few minutes. You would save the time. You can do this. You can do your valuable work in that time. It's almost trying to define the problem, and because like you're right, because if people have been doing something for years and years, and suddenly you sort of say, okay, from tomorrow, this is the new way of doing things, you'll be doing it. I mean, why should I mean, this is working perfectly fine for me for the last 20 years. Why should I suddenly change just because you have told me?
yeah,
So it's always important to bring them early on in the whole life cycle, define the problem with them, bring them along, let them do the user testing, because there will be points like in the sort of the development of product that you would miss out coming from an outsider,
yeah,
whereas they have been using the system and think, oh, like if you can do this, that would serve me better, which means that I will be more sort of like wanting to use the product. And that's how
yeah,
you sort of help to enhance the data
yeah,
culture and data literacy and all that nice stuff which you would do. So that
yeah,
I would say probably one. Second thing which I've seen is sometimes, not always, because when you create a data product, you have to have an owner, and that owner is not just the person or the group of people that define the product, but also people who support the product. So that ownership and governance and all the stuff, people are like, oh, I've already got a full-time job. I
yeah,
don't have time to do anything else.
yeah,
And it's always that balance of, yes, you have a full-time job, but then if you could help, or maybe say 10% of your week's 40 hours, if you do devote to that, that would help sort of help your team and all that. So it's like trying to convince them and get like proper data owners, be it a data steward, be it like a data product owner. We should have that, because like when you are an external firm coming to a client, you do the job, you do the release it to production, support them through the hypercare, but what's the next step? Unless you want to, like, none of us want to stay on for years and years supporting the same product. We'd always like to move on to better, interesting things. So what is important that the business actually agrees to own the data products. The ownership is probably the big thing. One thing which I've also seen is that we talk about agile so much. Like, yes, it has to be agile, it has to be sprints, but not everything falls into an agile bucket. So it's sometimes the mix of waterfall and agile. Like, if you're going to, again, going back to the question, the thing that we discussed about domain-driven design, standards, repeatability, consistency, there is like sort of a period where you need to define them. And that is almost like an waterfallish sort of approach to a project management.
Yeah, because that's, sorry to cut, I don't mean to cut you off there, but this is you've said some really interesting stuff there, and I completely agree in terms of like the agile and waterfall concepts, that not everything falls into that agile bucket. Because and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that there are going to be times where you come to build a data product and there's almost like a well-defined way of what they want to be built, but you've not got some of them fundamental building blocks in place in terms of like we were talking about earlier. You've not done your conceptual logical modeling, so you don't necessarily know what a customer is, what a patient is, things like that. Like, so if you've not got that in place, you don't want to, you could go really down the wrong direction if you define it just in that single product. So sometimes you need to take that step back to actually push forward. And I know it's not what people want to hear a lot of the time, is that it's like, we're agile, we do this, and this, but sometimes, exactly as you say, you've got to go, right, this is the product we want to build, but in order to enable this product, we need to put these foundations in place first of all.
Exactly. And to be honest, like, you could like do this task in an agile way, but then probably that
100%.
first 3 to 6 months or whatever, how long the time is, you need to sort of box that and say, this is what I'm going to do, and then I can sort of release the individual teams
100%.
to do their own work. So I think because, but then people are like so much into agile, they're saying, oh, that's waterfall, that's like 1990s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that people sort of confuse agile, I would say, with just building something quick, which I don't think is right. Like, is that it's more about the iteration. The idea is you go quicker, but ultimately it's not just about building something quick. And it might be that it takes 6 months, as you say, and you can still put those building blocks in place in an agile way, but you still need to, it needs to be done. It's not something you can just go, right, we're just going to build this quick and we're going to ignore all these important steps.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and then last, just to finish this off, one thing that people sort of misuse is the word technical debt. They say, okay, we are doing the agile. Oh, it's fine to sort of accumulate a bit of technical debt, but then you don't want to spend another 6 months just to unravel that technical debt and like go back to square one.
100%. Yeah, and that, the technical debt's a funny one, because I completely get it in certain scenarios that you should be comfortable to carry some technical debt, but it's very easy to just continue to carry it and not. For me, you need to, if you are going to carry that technical debt, you need to make sure there's a plan in place in order to remove that debt, which I don't think happens a lot of the time, because it becomes you prioritize new features and things like that on a product, which is completely understandable. But and partly because people won't necessarily, they'll just know the word technical debt, but they don't actually know what that entails.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a really important one that people need to be aware of, because there's, as I'm sure everyone's been aware of, where they've done something quickly and know that they're going to have to go back and fix it, and it's hard to go back and fix stuff unless you've been very explicit to say this needs to be fixed on this date. Things like that.
I mean, like, one of the things that we like to say is it is very quick to sort of accumulate technical debt, but it's very slow to unravel.
100%. That's it's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, it really is. And the more, it's also it's not just like 1 + 1 = 2. You know,
Mm.
it really, like, if you put technical debt on top of more technical debt, it's just become
It
it's
just
yeah, it really,
snowballs. Yeah.
it really snowballs. So yeah, I think it's one of them things that for me bring small debt, which is probably the same in life. Yeah, you know, don't
Yeah,
accumulate massive amounts of debt. Have
absolutely.
a small amount of debt is probably a good thing, but also, you know, make
Yeah.
sure you've got plans to pay that off.
Oh, that's good. And and just to finish off your question, Carl, like from an implementation side, I think what works well is like, yes, you need to have like once you've sort of done that initial phase of defining what works and what doesn't, and sort of defining the frameworks and patterns and everything, you always need to have that thin line of architecture COE or whatever you want to call it. And their job is to mainly sort of to iterate the frameworks and patterns and keep an eye and support the different domain teams. Because again, going back to the sort of the agile versus waterfall, yes, we would like to enable as many teams in parallel, and they can do it because we have already done the hard work up front. But then if you have the domain teams or pods, develop them, it's always good to have that thin layer of architecture COE who can sort of, yes, you're doing the right way. Yes, checkbox, checklist ticked. Now you can go into production. So I
Yeah.
think that works. That sort of like team structure works pretty well. Like you have an architecture COE and then sort of X number of domain teams. I wouldn't say reporting back, but almost like in having that touch and sort of going back and forth, feedback or whatever call it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I want to be really conscious of your time here still, because I know you're
Oh,
very
yeah, that's
busy,
fine.
a very, very busy man. But so just finally, I mean, what's next? Like, have you got any upcoming trends in the industry that you're particularly excited about? And you know, any technologies and things like that you'd like to go through?
Yeah, sure. Probably this is what I mean, this is a chat which I had last week with one of my colleagues, and we were saying that even though the term data products or data as a product evolved from data mesh, and we are not going to data mesh now, but then data products can live without data mesh. You
Oh,
can
100%,
have data
100%.
product
Yeah, yeah.
without having data mesh.
Yes.
So like sometimes when you say data product, people get a bit scared, saying, oh God, now I need to do data mesh, which is like a 2-year journey costing millions of pounds. No, you don't need to do data mesh. If you have a good enough data governance, if you have clear knowledge of what you want to build, you can build your
Yeah.
data product, which will serve you well. And then in future, if you want, or it makes sense for you to go to data mesh, because not every business, it doesn't make sense to go to a data mesh. Some are
No,
quite
yes. Some people could just have a data lakehouse, couldn't they? You know, like
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, you know, data lakehouse. You can very, I mean, I would say that lends itself very well to building data products.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably on the industry trends, I mean, if I look at the main three public clouds like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, like Amazon has got their lake formation, which works well with
Yeah.
data products. Azure have got their Synapse Analytics, works well, and Google has got their Dataplex. So if you look into the like going a bit deeper into the logical structure, they're almost similar, but then they all will, like, depending on where you are, what landscape you have, they can all help you develop the data products at scale.
Yeah. 100% makes total sense. Yeah, and I think again, won't get into this too much because again, we could be talking about this forever. I think some of the announcements that Microsoft made around Fabric will be
Yeah.
quite interesting. And not to be confused with Data Fabric,
Oh,
although I
yes.
feel like that name was carefully picked because I think it does sort of enable that. But I also interesting to see what the other vendors do in response to that as well, because I think it's going to be I think it's a really interesting time for data. I mean, it seems to always be an interesting time, but in particular at the moment, particularly some of the things you said at the start in terms of like the data product and data as a product, is that you can build data products and serve data as a product, but if people don't know what it is, where to access it, what value it derives, it's really not going to work. And this is where I think this new data fabric and things like that, and making sure that you're documenting the metadata and ensuring who you know who uses a product, and people can subscribe to products and subscribe to data as a product. I think I'm really excited to see where that goes and what, because I think as things stand, it's probably quite it's quite difficult to manage some of those things because I'm not sure the technology's caught up with some of the theory. There's definitely some things in place, but I think over the next couple of years we're going to see huge leaps in that area.
Absolutely. And to be like, I mean, we have this discussions day in, day out with different clients, and to be honest, like whether you do data mesh, data products, data fabric, whatever you do, the key thing is to have a good governance. If you have that in place, the rest of things become, I won't say easy, but feasible.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, brilliant. Thanks so much for this, Sil. It's been really useful. I've definitely learned a lot, and it's given me a lot of things to think about, which I can ponder over the rest of the day. So hopefully I'll get to see you in person soon, and we can have a chat about this in a bit more detail.
Definitely, Carl, and it was a pleasure speaking with you as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sil.